It's been 2.5 years since we've had a conversation with one of our two guests today. We're still hanging out here at the North American Conservation and Drainage Expo. And what better guest to have than somebody that is really taken on the conservation topic to his heart. And I can't wait to meet Lance, who's also sitting here, and learn more about him. So, Corey, why don't you tell our listeners who we've got hanging out with us today at the show?
So we got Zach Smith, the stock cropper, and Lance Peterson, who I do not have much for words about. But founders of the stock cropper, it's a new farming system that incorporates both crops and livestock in the field at the same time, and a unique arrangement that leverages each off of the other. So let's start with Lance, because I don't have anything wrote for your background. Who are you?
Sure. Lance Peterson, friend of Zach Smith here. Farm in east central Minnesota, up in the St. Croix River Valley, about an hour north of the Twin Cities Metro. Strip till farmer, conservation minded, and I guess vocal voice and ag for doing what we should be doing out there. One of the cool things would be, 3 years ago, coming up here in March, was coming up with the idea on stock cropper between Zach and a friend of ours not here, Sheldon Stevermer.
Lance had the original idea of putting the pen of animals in between strips of corn. So he was the genesis that kind of originally hatched that thing, and then it kind of went from there. So,
okay. But yeah, that was, kind of that blend of where we're at with the ag economy at that time, of trying to figure out a way of better revenue across the entire acre, $3-4 corn. And then also bringing in that conservation piece of being able to do something with the land that is a more responsible way of agriculture.
Very cool. And Zach, how do you introduce yourself?
Zach, the stock cropper from Winnebago County. Been farming since 2010. Same with Lance, a lot of conservation principles, strip till cover crops. I spent most of my career, the first half, in ag retail, so chemical retail for a large independent, and then was a Pioneer seed dealer, granular rep, chem dealer up until last year, and I exited, had a chance to go farm full time. And then the stock cropper was happening, and so I decided to put more effort into my startup and see where we could take that thing. So,
well, now I think it's time to reintroduce the stock cropper.
Yeah.
How do you guys describe that?
So the stock cropper is the reintroduction of livestock and row crops together, kind of working in harmony and introducing a lot more diversity out in the field that we have in our, my normal corn and soybean operation. I don't have any extra livestock, so I don't get that component in. But it's a way to utilize essentially the technology of yesteryear, when we didn't have a lot of the things we have now. We just had animals to fertilize with. And so the idea is to change the arrangement inside of fields to kind of exploit things like the edge effect in corn, and then the ability to stack multiple enterprises with the cluster cluck autonomous barns that we put together, that you can have sheep, pigs, goats, chickens, cattle, and have multiple enterprises, just like how when I ran my retail business, I had enterprise stack. I sold seed, chem, fert. When I walked onto a farm, I could sell things 5 or 6 different ways, and it's the same idea with this thing. You're stacking more enterprises, limiting risk, and doing so. The big thing with the soil health movement right now is there's really not a good, legitimate way to scale up the introduction of livestock, grazing controlled across. Everybody has that idea, but as far as coming up a way to execute it on, that's what I think we've stumbled onto it, and it's been good. We're coming up on our 3-year anniversary, and we've gone from an idea on a prototype, or for an idea for a prototype, to actually last year, Lance and Sheldon and I got to watch the Cluster Cluck Nano walk on its own on their solar power, powered with my iPhone, and programmable movement with a couple different species of livestock, and it's been fun from a farmer standpoint to take it from an idea and see it actually work, and now we're trying to take the next step with it. So
since this is a podcast and we do have a visual aspect, but a lot of people might be listening, how would you try to describe the cluster cluck to our listeners?
Yeah. What's that look like, Lance?
I mean, it's from a simple point. It's a barn on wheels. Has a structure, has an internal. The prototype, the first round had a floor in there, raised floor that they would be off of the off of the pasture area. But then it has that open space pen out front.
Mm-hmm.
Onboard water storage tanks, feeders. That you're bringing that kind of barnyard out to the field.
Yep.
The coming up now, it has the solar power. Being able to wirelessly control it for movement, autonomous movement, scheduled.
Yeah.
Just you have your wheels between the lanes, and that's, I guess that's the simple way of just that mobile barn.
Yep.
Is kind of what it would be.
I didn't realize that had a floor in it, but that makes a
It
lot
has
of sense.
Does it still have a floor?
So the new one that we came out last year with, we didn't put one in, but if you're going to have hogs in the system, you've got to have the ability to get them up. Because, if you've ever been around pigs and you see what they
They'll
do in the
root out.
mud, they root till who laid the rail. And so you got to, if it goes to rain, we have the ability in the barn to actually close the pigs up and have enough. We designed the barn so it has the same confinement space requirement for spacing inside. So it's got both the inside and the outside space for access. But if we need to lock them up for a day so they don't destroy stuff, we've got the ability to do that.
And you said this carries its own water.
Correct.
So 8 pounds per gallon, this thing's got to be pretty heavy.
Yeah, so we have on board on the first design that we did, we had 110 gallons of water carrying capacity, which would give us about, depending on heat, time of year, 2.5 days of water carrying capacity. The barn is designed to catch rainfall, so when it rains, we need 9/10 of an inch, and it funnels in an inverted V into a gutter system into that. So it's a double-edged sword. We've learned that can be a detriment because now all of a sudden you've got 1,000 pounds extra weight on your chassis.
Yep.
Right after a rain.
Right after a rain. The key to this, what we found is, what we've learned, Lance and I, through, some of these other practices with getting your soil structure improved, we can carry a hell of a lot better, when you don't have the disturbance out there, even after. I've moved the barn after 4 or 5 inch rain and not had an issue with doing that before. So it comes down to the basics of soil health. You got to get some of that stuff lined up and working in your favor ahead of time, I think. If you're going to go out and deep rip and try to run one of my barns through it the next spring, you're going to probably be stuck right away. But it kind of goes to reinforce the principles of some of the stuff that we're passionate about and kind of the direction why we went this way.
So the cluster cluck, even though it's a new idea for how it is now, it's not necessarily the concept isn't right. Like when I was in high school, I called them chicken tractors.
Yeah,
it was just chickens, broilers or whatever, and we would just have half covered, half not. And I'd take water to them every day, and we'd just move every day or two in the yard.
Yep.
And they'd eat the bugs and fertilize the grass. But
right.
So you have basically streamlined this.
Yeah, the issue with all of that stuff is the manual. There's a lot of people doing rotational grazing, like with cattle and moving polywire stuff. But the thing is you have to be there all the time. And the thing I've learned in doing this and being the guy on site is that it's a pain in the butt to move this thing 3 times a day. And it's really, there's no way to scale that either, to have the labor requirement out there to go out. That's all you do is move barns. But if you have the batteries, the solar power, where we had GPS guidance, RTCAN last year, it just goes down the line, and it's pretty neat to come back and you see that it's moved the 3 times. So the animals are always moving in a fresh pasture. The pigs are always moving. The chickens are always moving. Everything's contained, and when it works, it's really slick.
What livestock are you running in it now?
We've built 4 different prototypes now, each with a different configuration. The first one that we built the first year was sheep and goats out front, then pigs, and then a trailing chicken tractor with poultry in it. And then the second year we built what we call the Cluster Cluck Max 9, which is kind of a rip-off of the X9 combine. John Deere came out with it that year. Because it was our big boy. It was a 30-footer, and meant to be more like for working better with typical row crop widths than the smaller stuff that we'd built. That had cattle and pigs in it, cattle out front, pigs in the back. And then the Cluster Cluck Nano is what we've made the last couple years, and that is designed more for like a homesteading type market, maybe with that barn where you have like a small ruminant like sheep or goats to be a lawnmower, and then you have poultry in the back. So,
Okay. I think we should stay on the livestock side, and then we'll go to the crop side.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to navigate this.
So
I like that.
I think we've talked about the cluster cluck. We've talked about the livestock. Now let's talk about the end for the livestock. Do you have like a specific market? Are you able to market these differently than a guy with hogs out of a barn or chickens, in the backyard, or is it just all the same?
so there's lots of different certifications in meat markets, right? There's organic and, standard stuff. I think with something like this is so much different than anything else. I think like if this is going to take off, we're going to have to come up with a market specifically around this and be able to communicate what this is, to a consumer. The biggest limitation with all of this stuff in this realm, realistically, is that the processing is the biggest hurdle. What are you going to do with these animals if you do this at scale? There's just, we've gone away in agriculture from having the local, independent hog buyer. It's Smithfield, JBS, Tyson, and so it really is restricted it. And so, in order for, this is I'm just as passionate about this idea as I was 3 years ago. But for you to see this in an 80-acre field or 160-acre field in Iowa, there's going to have to be other things that come along from an infrastructure standpoint to make it realistic. So,
That's a good question, Corey, because everybody's looking for value added, especially when it comes to livestock and being able to sell a product. But I'm now excited to kind of go back to one of the initial comments that you guys made during your introduction. So, Lance, you mentioned that you do a lot of strip till.
Yes.
And strip till is different from strip cropping, which is something else that we heard during the introduction. So what is strip cropping, and why should our listeners be excited about that?
Well, you take strip cropping, instead of having an entire 80, I don't get lucky enough to have them up in northern Minnesota, but you take your field and you put out widths of, typically we would see a corn, soybean, let's call it 40 feet of corn, 16 or 30, and then your 40 feet of soybeans, and you kind of go every other pass throughout the field. And what that allows you to do is now capture more sunlight on these edge rows. You run more sunlight on that entire corn plant. You can kind of push the population, push more ears out there, and then you have the area in between where your soybeans are that are allowing that extra sunlight to come through. They're not shading. So on the strip cropping aspect, that allows you to run these multiple crops and kind of push a little more revenue on that acre or acres of corn. You do have to be cautious with what you would potentially give up in the soybean yield versus if that was a monocrop piece. But then you also get kind of this added benefit that we see from the I guess soil health aspect of these two crops alternating through the field, of kind of natural erosion protectors out there, which is kind of a cool little process you typically don't think of if you're all one crop out there. That would get it's all treated the same tillage wise, where now you could do something differently between these two. And you can do strip cropping, and you can, like Zach does, strip till the strip cropping.
and then hopefully eventually stock crop within the intercrop.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was
Then you
my
don't
next
have to have beans.
Yeah, that was the whole reason. That's a great comment,
Yeah, that's
because
true.
what we were trying to figure out 3 years ago, we've been interested in strip intercropping for over a decade. Okay, and we've been playing around with it. The edge effect is there. You can grow more corn. Everybody gets hot and bothered over growing more corn. The key is, what do you do with the space in between? And the beans, there's always a little bit of a penalty. And so that was the thing with how can we create more revenue inside of that lane? And that's where through strip cropping, that's how we got to the stock cropper, with putting the stacked livestock enterprises, and then providing our own fertilizer, getting that natural benefit of being able to control our nutrient output onto the field.
So maybe I'm lost. What is intercropping?
So intercropping is what he was just describing, where you're planting multiple crops in the field, sometimes in different arrangements. In our arrangement, it's
So almost like cover crop, but you're side by side.
Not cover crop. No, it's so like
You're gonna use
example. I had a corn soybean field this year where I planted every other 20-foot corn, 8 rows of corn, 8 rows of beans.
Okay, I gotcha.
Replicated the whole way across. That's what Lance was just describing.
Yeah, between strip cropping or intercropping, kind of
So it's not-
interchangeable.
So the intercropping's not like what I imagined is the Jason Mock of having wheat planted in between the beans.
That's-
relay cropping.
that's
That would
relay
be
cropping.
relay
Yeah.
cropping.
Relay. Okay.
The terms get to be a bit ambiguous. Yeah, relay cropping is when you're trying to, like what Jason does is he goes out and plants his wheat in the fall with that unique configuration behind the manure tanker,
Yep.
and then comes in and then relays in the soybeans in early April, harvests the wheat, gets the revenue bump from growing good beans afterwards.
I
And,
see.
Yeah. So.
You've been working with Jason a little bit too, haven't you?
Yeah. Jason and I have become good friends. He's been a huge supporter of the stock cropper. He bought the first barn last fall. When we came up with the idea, he helped. His Twitter following is huge. I mean, compared to somebody like me, and so he amplified us substantially. And he's just he's passionate about this idea of changing arrangement in fields and leveraging, like he would say, natural algorithms to our advantage rather than looking to go buy an input from somebody like me that used to sell them all the
Yeah.
time.
Mhm.
So
I'd like to be in his head for a day.
I don't know that you want to.
Maybe an hour. Yeah.
Just a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably. I'd learn a lot.
So you said he's got one of these barns. How many setups are there? How many stock croppers exist?
So at this point, I think we have, was it 5 that we've built and produced. The goal for this year was to be at the point where we would have our first production run, but we didn't get as far as what we wanted to with our guidance systems to make them surefire enough to release them out. That's the goal for this year. And then we're also going to be producing, to what Corey was talking about, an actual backyard chicken tractor, where the concept would be you would for somebody in an urban setting, that they could be able to grow their own protein and or their eggs, now that they're going to be $10 a
Yeah.
dozen by the end of the week. So, and that's the thing. There's a lot of different avenues for this to go into. It's not just, we're not limited by just putting it into a cropping field. So
That's like a Roomba for the backyard.
Yeah.
I call it a
but-
protein Roomba.
Do you really?
Protein room,
Yeah.
Have you, I'm assuming you've ran the proof of concept, or you've probably been in it long enough, so that strip of beans that you're replacing with the stock cropper or
Mhm.
the cluster cluck, how much more is that producing in revenue? Do you think? Obviously, I mean, it's
Well, this year in the normal configuration, I grew 69 bushel beans. Okay. And
nice.
And yes, nice. Yeah. Grew 69 bushel beans. The normal static yield on the outside of the field was 75, so there was about a 6 bushel hit. Okay. The value of the livestock that we grew in the 20-foot cluster cluck, the original one that we designed, if you use that and sold it at average pasture raised pricing and use that schematic that USDA posts, I think we raised approximately about $12,000 per acre in value on that. So 69 bushel beans times whatever, $15
Yep.
is less than 12,000.
Wow, significantly less.
Yeah. But the key is, like I said, you've got to have the ability to process it and get it to the market that's willing to pay for it. So,
Whereas like Jason Mock kind of did that himself.
correct.
He's got his own
Built a meat
Muncie
company.
meats and yeah.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be difficult if you were just going to focus on the poultry and the swine side. There's some pretty easy outlets, as far as just getting them sold for market weight, market price, not a premium.
Right.
So there's outlets for both of those markets, but it's a real big bonus when you could create a brand, create a story, and get your product put out that direction to really maximize on it. But I didn't expect there to be such a big value difference. Granted, like I said, you got to get it to market. And
That's why when people look at it and they say, well, how does that make financial sense when they look at the cost of what the barn is? But when you stack the enterprises and you can access those markets and have a unique story, it changes the math.
I mean,
So-
that's $1,125 if 75 bushel beans at $15. It's $1,125
so it's a 10x.
gross, and that's not even, now you're probably fertilizing and you got chemicals and, all that other stuff. So like,
Yeah, the nutrient value the animals are
God.
putting out. Last year, for example, we grew 303 bushel corn where we had the barns go the last year in a 4-row strip intercrop arrangement. So we had the edge boost. We had zero fertility other than a little bit of nitrogen that we top dressed, and so there's a lot of.
So you cut way back on the following year's crop inputs.
Oh yeah.
That's the money's made in the margins, right there, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
It's compounding.
Yeah, that's farm for profit.
It's very compounding on all aspects.
So what's your limiting factor to? I guess let me rephrase this. First question is: you've got a 40-acre field. How many acres does it take to support one of your barns?
So it's all about time and space movements. So the 20-foot barn that we've designed needs about 3/4 of an acre to operate in a year. And so
That's it.
That's it. Yeah. And because
So you
we're
could
going
have
to
a lot
go
of
and we're going to
barns.
hit it twice. We're going to graze it, let it recover, come back, hit it one more time. So it's 2 cycles a year. And so, I mean, if you weren't doing the 2 cycles, it'd be an acre and a half, but essentially 1/3 of an acre print. And, we can grow 10 to 12 hogs, 300 chickens, and probably 8 sheep or goats or something like that.
So a 40-acre field could have roughly 10 barns on it.
Yeah.
Without any issue, more than likely.
Yes.
How
Weather
important?
dependent.
How important is the? You've tested in a certain spot of the world with certain soils. We get to lesser soils. I'm guessing the math changes, just like the yield potential on lesser farms is less as well. Have you tried it on sandy soil or on
No.
lighter?
We haven't, just because I'm the only one doing the test site, and I'm in Winnebago County, and we have some sand. We talked about that earlier. Maybe I should have bought that farm you were trying to sell.
You should have bought that 28 acres worth of town. It's
For
perfect.
$12,000
This
an
is
acre in revenue a
perfect.
year, you could buy a lot of farms.
Buy a lot.
But that's the thing so I think this is one of the points, like for less than desirable stuff.
Yeah.
I think for that people don't want the corners, that it's hard to get in with the DB 120, right? Who wants it? All of a sudden you come in and you employ a cluster cluck, and it's gonna. The relative value of the pasture is going to be contingent to the soil type.
Yeah.
Right. So Webster versus sand, you're going to have
big
difference.
How about this?
But that should be lesser quality, lesser priced land.
Yeah.
And if you had lesser yield expectations, there still would be a multiplying factor. Probably an equation.
There is, but you asked, what's taking your 40 acres is if you have a Nicolette or a nice Webster soil that commercial production agriculture is out there, are they going to take the time to scale down? Instead of 24-row planter, now we're down to 3/4 of an acre or acre and a half to move this. Are they gonna when's the juice worth the squeeze? You'd have to show the financial gain 10x to make it worth it. You got to show the margin.
The thing that we were passionate about between Lance and Sheldon and myself, we were trying to come up with this, is how do we allow somebody to be 500 acres and still stay in this business? Because
Good point.
And so if your goal is you only need 40 acres or 80 acres and you want to still stay involved, this is how you have to think.
Mm-hmm.
And, because we're both corn and soybean commodity producers. We're in the scale business on our main enterprises. But I'm only 1,200 acres. How much longer am I going to be relevant?
Yep.
With things. So anyway.
I got a question on, obviously this is just a summer thing when the crops are growing. Right? How do the life cycles of the livestock line up with marketing in the summer that you're doing that? I'm just seeing all these tractors, these cluster clucks coming to the edge of the field, and then you got to corral them all into something. Then you got to have a space for them, right? Unless they go right to market.
Yeah. It's designed to go to market. So 2 batches of chickens within a 4-month time, 4 months to finish the hogs, 4 months to finish a lamb or goat kid.
Okay.
I didn't even ask. What size do the hogs go in at?
Just like normal, like they would, like I took some to the butcher the first year, they were 280, 300.
And you get them at 15, 20 pounds, or what size are the hogs?
We buy 35, 40-pound feeder pigs. They're a little bit more hardy when you get them to that weight when you're putting them outside if it's cool in May or June. So
what's next? So GPS gets this thing to move by itself.
I think it already does. doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does.
Yep.
Just
They said
better
they're working on
guidance.
that this year.
We got to perfect that system. Yeah.
Yep.
And you're working with Don
Yeah.
on that?
Joe Bassett
Joe?
at Dawn Equipment has been the engineering and manufacturing, partner on that. And so the next thing is to get those things perfected and hopefully start scaling up and producing and kicking more out.
I'd like to get him on the podcast sometime.
Yeah,
His
he's
mind is one I'd like to
Yeah,
be in
yeah.
for an hour
Joe
or two.
can go a lot of places
Yeah.
too. So, but and then this year we're going to have a couple of the Nanos out. One that I think is getting announced today at Precision Planning at their winter conference. We're going to be sending one of them if everything goes well. They're interested in strip intercropping and they want to use. They've been watching us. They want to have one down there. And we're going to be deploying some of these backyard ones, and I'll continue to be doing our research site outside of Buffalo Center, and likely have a field day for people that are interested to come and see it again.
Corey, you need one of those backyard ones.
Yeah, I do. What
Do they
what-
go around play sets and the toys my kids leave in the yard?
That's the hard part, and I don't know if we're going to attempt that the first thing. I think the first version is going to be you line it up, tell the app, I've got 60 feet of not screwing up here and going a straight line.
Like the old John Deere or the old tractor sprinklers. You take and you put the stake in the ground, and it's got the string tied to it, and it'll only come up to where the stake is.
I don't know, if I'm thinking if it's a Roomba, you just take a piece of magnet strip and put it around and it senses it and doesn't go there. No.
You said that people followed you. How important has social media been to the production of your idea?
90% of it.
90%.
I mean, it's a good idea, but there's lots of people that have good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't get shared, you don't get them in the hands of the right folks. And the networking has been the most important thing about the whole, and like just connecting me with the various players that have come in to help get us to the point we're at right now.
What do you think the target cost for one of these units will be, a couple of years down the road when you're actually pumping them out?
It's hard to say because, the prototypes are really expensive right now. But ideally, I think if we could sell the original one that we designed for, the math works in the system at 15 to 20,000 a barn, amortized over 7 years. And they're built to have a longer lifespan than that. So that would give a rough idea. But
So, yeah, it wouldn't be a drop in the bucket to get a fleet of them.
it wouldn't be, but if you look at, somebody that just wants their own protein autonomy and they've got an acreage and they've got a $35,000 John Deere lawn tractor sitting in the yard with a loader to make them feel good about moving snow in the wintertime, what is an investment like this? Sorry if that touched the button.
100,000.
We spread manure. We spread manure.
We move a couple
He also
bales.
moves the
We
gravel
move a
around
couple
in the
bales.
They just
driveway.
write it off.
Right. It's that Schedule F.
The write-off.
So, Lance,
179.
we're sitting down here at a conservation expo. It's right in the title of the show. So there's been a lot of great educational opportunities down here. I had to duck out early last night to go back to my third graders' Christmas concert that got delayed because of weather and then teacher unavailability, just so on and so forth. And one of the songs that they sang last night was called SNIRT. I cannot make this up.
Yep.
They talked about how dirty it was and what happens when it turns into mush. I mean, the lyrics to this song had to have been written by you guys.
I could probably say that I was maybe some inspiration for that. That's very possible.
I wonder if I got a video of this. While you guys are chatting about what SNIRT is, I'll
Snow
see if
dirt.
I can play the
First thing I want to say, though, is that I was trying to get Lance. We signed in. We wanted to make him the SNIRT sniffer. We saw Tony's tag yesterday.
SNIRT sniffer.
Sniffer.
Yeah. So anyway, go.
Is that going to
Lance.
be the title of the show now?
Snort
No, that
sniffing.
was the on
Stock Cropper and the SNIRT sniffer.
As he's got a Dare Drugs shirt on.
right. Yeah, pretty normal attire for a farm. No, it was noticeable on the way down. That you get to the road ditches on the freeways, and you get to see the black road ditches instead of the white. From what we had, it must have been here over Christmas time, that blizzard that
A
came
few days
through.
before Christmas. It was 40, 50, 60 mile an hour for 3 straight days.
Right. And that you get anything that has the exposed soil moving across. It collects in the road ditches and makes for some nice Twitter material. Gets people both ag and urban, discussing what we got there of our topsoil in the ditch. And that obviously is going to run off somewhere at some point that isn't very pro land quality for what you have. You have an expensive asset. We were just talking before the recording here, some of the prices that you're paying to buy some ground. Maybe we should kind of look at what type of value is leaving that top inch when we get the conditions that allow for that to happen.
Yeah, that stuff was moving a long ways, because even by some no-till fields and stuff, like wasn't as bad, but it's still there. I mean, and
you still had the stuff hovering up that was still filtering
it was
down.
moving counties.
Yeah.
You know.
All right, let's see if we can get this.
SNIRT. They had to because that concert would have been.
That's incredible.
That concert would have been
I
before
can't make it
Christmas.
up. I cannot make it up.
Only an
And they must have wrote that song between Christmas and now.
Huh.
That's crazy.
That's
So-
third graders already on the conservation train.
Well, I like that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
No, then that's the we see it in social media with bringing up conservation topics in ag. It can kind of be one of those elephant in the room things that we kind of squirm a little bit. We don't like hearing something, especially if it comes outside of our industry. Of anything, even from. I saw there's a few news articles, I think it was South Dakota, that they were out in the road ditches doing a news story on it, saying, why is this here? And that's where we have to answer, why is it here? And are we doing everything that we can to prevent that? No, we're not. And what can we do to enhance the adoption rate of trying some of these things that we don't have to have a SNIRT portion of the Christmas musical.
Yeah.
Then he should have said Snirty the Snowman or something. Or Frosty the Snurt Man. I don't know. But
You're just stretching now.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, you could make a Snurt Snowman. But so how do we combat that? I mean, I think just generally in my mind, thinks no-till, cover crops. Is there anything else we can be doing to?
Well, what percent of ag acres adopt those practices right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's small.
10%.
And why do you think that is? I mean, I don't think even if someone's out there fully tilling, wants to lose an inch of their topsoil. What is?
Well, do you
our
want the
barrier?
nice answer or the?
Well, give it to us. Give it to us
you.
straight.
Why do they not do it?
Yeah.
Fear of getting kicked out of their clique.
Yeah.
Fear of failure. Probably it's a societal thing that if you don't till everything black in the fall, you're a lazy farmer.
That's true.
Landlord pressure that says, hey, farm it like how I farmed it. These are some of the real things. And then you come to it and say, what financial market incentive is there for me to farm environmentally responsible? Is there a penalty when we have SNIRT?
No.
Is there a penalty when we put nitrate in the water?
No.
So full bore, put your foot on the gas. Don't worry about the brake. And that's kind of been the tough thing on how our just general ag policy allows us to keep doing that. And then you have the
policy is the problem because this is the thing I want to, say farmers react to what the policy is. They're trying to make money. And if you're trying to make money, the reason people do things is because, some of the things that have negative externalities make it easier to that path. We're all human beings. We take the path of least resistance. And if tilling a field in the fall is going to make your life easier in the spring and there's no penalty for any of the negative things that happen, that's why people do it, right? And so especially now it's scaled operations where you've got a lot to get over, wide planting windows with, tight, you're gonna stack the deck in your favor. And the problem with our policy is that, like Lance was saying, there's no penalty for that. And we know that these things are inherently true.
So it's not necessarily that we need an incentive to do a certain practice. It probably could be more effective if the alternative is penalized.
Yeah, you would have to have a balance. It's the carrots and sticks thing. Someone asked one time,
I don't know. Think of speeding. And if you were speeding,
you're unique.
No, hold on here. You get a penalty if you speed, but if they paid me to go slow, I'd probably go slow.
Here's the thing I'm going to say.
Still speed and try to get around it.
Why should anybody pay a farmer to do what's inherently in their own best interest?
That's true.
Dave, you're selling what? You told me what, $24,000 land?
Yep.
Okay. So, but we sell a farm we buy a farm for $25,000, and then you let it blow all winter long and wash in the spring, and we need somebody to come out and say, I mean, it's just to me, like, when you think about it, and you look at how much money we spend on taking care of tractors on Twitter. We got the Andy Clean stickers all over the place. The pride that gets spent on that to maintain that asset, and that's the depreciating asset. Tractors aren't going up like what land is. And the land is where all the value comes from in the whole thing. And I think when you flip the narrative and you make it like, well, what are you doing for the asset out there? What for the inputs that you're putting out? What's your efficiency on them? Are you keeping them? Or are they going somewhere else? And I put a video out a while back on my opinions on the farm bill coming up. And one of the things, I don't think you give people speeding tickets. I think you give people options because people don't like the government telling them what to do.
Mm-mm.
I think this whole thing can be regulated through crop insurance in the fact that everybody starts at zero for a subsidy. But if you want to get up to the 62 or 65% subsidy level that the taxpayer funds, the taxpayer should get something in return for that investment, okay? And so if you want to adopt the practices that Lance is talking about and you want to limit tillage and do cover crops and put nitrogen on when the crop actually needs it instead of the middle of October, the taxpayer will invest in you as part of the having an abundant food supply, but in a more environmentally. And I think when they drive by the ditches and they know that they're just not dumping 62% into our premiums and getting this in return and having to run the waterworks, I think that's going to have a better public perception, and it's going to be a hell of a lot less costly in administering all these carrot programs that the government monies that's getting spent, the climate smart stuff, CSP, EQIP, all of those things.
Oh, the money that they're throwing at that.
And I don't think it's going to make any bit of a difference.
It's nuts. Absolutely nuts. I think the REAP grant program, and don't quote me on this, but went from $50 million last year to $800 million. And they didn't use the $50 million last year for green energy. That's like making a dryer more efficient, or that kind of stuff, or putting insulation in a hog barn.
So what's your thoughts on incentivizing for carbon credits? But the big part there is you have to change the tillage practice. So
right now it's the power of additionality.
So they're adding something to it. So the government, in a sense, is incentivizing. Now, if that gets $100 an acre, that's like paying me to go slow.
It is, and if you can take advantage of those things, I personally think you would agree. I think, Lance, the carbon credits I think it's a joke. I'm signed up, for them. I'm signed up through Corteva Carbon. I'm taking advantage of it, but I think most of them, when you look at how they're constructed, they're do one thing to qualify for this. And that's the thing when you're thinking about systems approach farming. You can't think about just adding if you're just thinking cover crops are going to solve all the problems, you're crazy.
Right.
It's a holistic systems approach, and it's tough because the business now is trained for silver bullet solutions, and we need to get people to think more comprehensively. So.
Well, Corey, do you have more before we get ready to wrap this conversation up?
I just had one note here that we were talking beforehand, and we kind of covered it, but the change of pace that farmers are going to this is slow. And you mentioned pride, and then you mentioned Andy Clean, and I'm kind of correlating the two. It's like they're prideful that they turned that farm black, and exactly what you mean, like. It's part of the clique. I've heard it from multiple people. That farm didn't even get their tillage done. They're terrible farmers, So that's it's just such a change.
When the entire group is doing the same activity, and they're all maybe deep down thinking, "Hey, we could be doing this better," but they don't want to vocally say it because now they're going to be on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
And that's not a comfortable spot in ag. You're already generally a small group.
Yep.
What percent of the population? Now you just kind of outcast yourself. Yeah, that's tough. But at the same time, it's okay to make friends with someone in an urban area. It's okay to make friends with a place that might want your crop if it's produced in a little more responsible manner.
Yeah.
The echo chamber we can get in sometimes is tough to get out, and I think that's where being a little more vocal about it and bring it to the table to talk about it is good. That's something I've learned.
If someone is right now wanting to do something, but they're still disc ripping in the fall and putting all their nutrients on in the fall, and they're not really doing it, what's the first step? What's the easiest thing to implement without being breaking the bank or being a major issue?
I think it's finding somebody like you. I mean, you're telling me you've got into strip till and doing some of these things. There's more people. I mean, when we got into it a long time ago, we were the lone unicorns.
Yep.
And there's definitely much more people to tap into and have people help you, because you're not going to be able to go to your local ag retailer. You're not going to, now John Deere's got into strip till, but there's just, in the conventional mindset, there's not as much help. And so you really need to build a community. Like
Yep.
Lance and I, we're a long ways away, but we had a community through a couple people and through the power of the internet, and that's how we got there.
Yep.
And but I think step one is just having an understanding of how soil and these things work and being honest about the actual agronomic principles that are going on. That's the part that gets me, is that the things that we're talking about advocating that some people lash out against if you suggest it. I went to Iowa State and studied agronomy. These are all the principles that we learned at school, and then we come out and do the opposite, because that's what we do, And so I think from, the percentage change, it was interesting. I was having a conversation with an investor the other day that had been also talking to Mitchell Hora, who you guys know.
Yep.
And we were talking about what's the rate of adoption at the NRCS office, or people wanting to work with CSP or Equip for this year with getting funded for, SWIT making conversions. All you hear is this green stuff everywhere you look. So where's the proof in the pudding? And I talked to my NRCS office. I said, how many new plans do you have on file for next year for people switching over? 0. And I told that to the investor guy. That's the same thing we heard from Mitchell Hora, that I think we've hit that plateau of the early innovators. And then the next step is how do you get into scaled operations? If you're farming 10,000 acres, this becomes much more difficult, because you really need skilled operators. You can't just send Uncle Harold from town out in the 7 shank and tear him loose and just hit resume all day long. You've got, some of the no-till, strip-till, cover crops, figuring all that stuff out. You've got to have skilled operators. And I think the only way to force that is to build in some of these negative external costs actually into the ledger, so it's realized when people are doing their accounting. Yeah. And I think, I think Lance and I would agree that the only way you're going to do that is through effective and thoughtful policy direction. So,
Well, you kind of mentioned, go back a little bit, where someone wants to make the change. They're like, all right, I'm sold, I want to do this, and they typically, they go to some of the first places they trust or they're used to, if it's a retailer, input decision maker, or their equipment dealer. Well, right off the bat, that's a pretty big headwind, and they might get discouraged. I remember the same time when we switched, it was, that's not going to work here. That's going to be tough. Yeah, I understand these things. These are tough. I'm willing to take on that challenge. Where do I go? And they kind of just give you a dead end.
Yeah.
Where now it honestly, it was tougher a decade ago, but now you get into Twitter, social media, type in some keywords, and you can find some users real quick, and ones that are willing to share.
Well, I tell you what, guys, as we wrap up, appreciate all the comments. We asked the same question to all of our guests that come on the podcast. So
it doesn't have to be about the stock cropper.
No, it doesn't. But what does success look like to you?
So think on it. It's a hard question. Think on it. Do you want me to summarize? Or
Go
do you
ahead.
wanna
Go
jump
ahead.
into that. So we're sitting down here at the North American Conservation and Drainage Expo, focused a lot on conservation today. We had both Zach Smith and Lance Peterson hanging out with us. Part of the stock cropper. They were the minds and continue to be the minds that are continuing to power this idea forward. Talked a little bit about strip cropping and intercropping. We got our wires uncrossed from what relay cropping, intercropping, strip cropping all is. But when you talk about the stock cropper in general, we're combining livestock into our fields with strip cropped conventional crops to hopefully, which it sounds like, boost revenue per acre and provide a more natural environment for conservation efforts. We're focused on trying to maintain and create the best quality of soil that we have access to, but then also there's a profitability aspect to this as well. We learned that the stock cropper is meant to be designed to be all-encompassing. It has its own onboard water, has its own onboard shade, provides each of the species of livestock the access to food, provides shelter, and now is continuing to be developed on moving autonomously, utilizing the technologies that are currently available. We had a great discussion as to what values they've seen when you put the stock cropper in a field, to what yield boost looks like, what you can take advantage of using, obviously maximizing the edge effect with the sunlight on corn, but then compared that to what a bean crop would look like on a standard year. Throw that all into the conservation bucket, which is why we're here today, into our little song rendition about SNIRT and where things can go, as well as towards the end of the show, kind of talking about the adjustments of mentalities from traditional cropping systems and what it might take to incentivize and get growers to switch into another style of practice. I just couldn't help but, when we were talking about the stock cropper, think of our Nebraska friends who give Corey crap all the time about not having to go work on pivots. If they get these units, all they're going to do is complain about having to go fix a tire on their stock cropper or go make sure that the wire got plugged in, connected to the solar
Maybe they
panel.
could drag it around with the pivot.
I could just drag it around.
We had that idea actually originally. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had to put that down. But then I also remembered that one of the quotes that we had from Kelly Garrett on this podcast is he said it's humbling when you realize that maybe your yield limiting factor is you. So back to your comment about what you learned, you're getting your agronomy degree at Iowa State, and then coming back and taking those principles and not applying them in a method in which you were taught, to where maybe that, to our listeners, still is the yield limiting, the profit limiting factor that you have is you. So that's what I've got for a summary today. Usually our guests end up listening to me and not thinking about their answer, but we'll start with Lance. What does success look like to you?
Being able to sleep at night.
Dang it, I'm not successful.
Magnesium, I told you, magnesium.
Last night I could not sleep. I was not successful today, or maybe yesterday. I don't know.
Last night, yesterday? When
So-
did it start? Was sleep start yesterday or end today?
Oh, it's both.
So being able to sleep at night, comfortable with all your decisions in life.
Yeah, that you're not spending too much time second guessing yourself, having doubts about things, and that that I think as I get older in life, it'll be, hey, I'm glad my kids don't hate me. So I think that'll be a
Good.
thing to shoot for.
Zach?
Yeah, it's simple. Just leaving things in a better place than I found them. That was my dad's mentality, and I didn't maybe understand it as much. But now that I'm halfway through my career and I've been successful, I've made money. It's just not as it's not the driver that once I start to think about legacy stuff more. And I'm passionate about ag, and I want to focus the rest of my career on leaving a positive mark and hopefully moving things in what I feel is the right direction. So
That's good. Two good answers. Corey, I'm going to make you challenge people today, but before we do that, guys, how can our listeners find you? Track you down social media or follow the stock cropper?
Yeah, Twitter, Peterson Farms, SEN. Try not to put my foot in my mouth too much on there.
Yeah, and I'm at Zebulus Prime on Twitter, and then if you search stock cropper, STOCKCROPPER on any of the social media platforms, you'll find us. YouTube and Twitter is where we put most of our content out on. So
Where did Zebulus Prime come from?
Zebulus Prime was my alter ego when I was in a rock and roll band 20 years ago. So
All
There's
right.
there's a whole podcast around that.
I'm going to push the button because I want to call an after show because I got 4 questions left.
Okay.
But my challenge is when thinking about conservation, and it's probably the right thing. Even if you're full tillage, right, you should be moving in the right direction to just take part of your farm and try it. We got into strip till. The barrier to entry is very expensive. I mean, these new Deere strip till machines are expensive. It doesn't mean you have to go buy new. I had a neighbor come over and strip till 2 or 3 fields for us one year, and that was enough to make us think about it. So I would just say try it. Get someone. So you got someone that could seed some cover crops for you. Try that out. It's better. You don't need the government telling you what to do.
Can I counter that?
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Burn the ships.
Just go right for it.
Burn the ships. If you fundamentally believe in these things and their sound practices and principles, are they going to be easy? No. You told me ahead of this you struggled your first year.
Yep.
I struggled for 3 years. All of our
Same.
friends, Lance is
Some years I still struggle.
it's all hard, but the fun thing is that if you go all in and you take those comfort options,
And you have to.
you have to.
Yeah, you got to ditch the training wheels.
Yep.
You
Burn
can
the
have 'em,
ships, ditch the training wheels.
Yeah.
I just know having that guy come in and strip for us, since it was kind of an afterthought, and I wasn't going to go buy a strip till machine at the time. I was like, it was not mine, and I didn't have the checkbook. It was more getting my dad
That
to figure it
we
out.
didn't talk about that.
That's
We
true.
can do that in the
Yeah.
but that is one of the major problems why this doesn't. It was the same thing with mine. My dad retired at 62. If he hadn't, none of this would have happened. So
Opportunity is missed by most because it's dressed in overalls and looks like hard work.
It's a
it's
good.
good.
That's a good outro, listeners. We're gonna do a post show.
Yep.
We're gonna do an after show here, but if you've crunched for time, thank you for hanging out with us again. I want to thank all of our sponsors. You caught them at the beginning of this show, but until next time, have a good one.